and I was like, what is going on? This is so cool, I love it. There's also a short story called The King, which is about this alien that lives in a corporate world. I definitely recommend the Stormlight Archive. Hello, welcome to this video. My name is Rhianna, and today I'm very excited because today I'm going to talk about my top 10 books of 2025. So 2025 was a brilliant reading year for me. I think it might be the best reading year I've ever had in my life in terms of how much I loved the books that I read. And so it was pretty hard to narrow down the books that I read to my top 10, but I had a little bit to think about it and I have determined that at this present time, I think these are my top 10 favourite that I read. And before we get into the books, a little bit about my reading tastes. So I typically tend to gravitate towards literary fiction books and fantasy books. So I love books about what it means to be alive, the human experience, that kind of thing. And I also love books about fantasy where I can just escape into another world. And so in this list, there's a bit of that, a bit of literary fiction, a bit of fantasy. But I also try to read a bit out of my comfort zone this year, and a few books surprised me as well. So book number 10 is Drive Your Plow Over the Bones of the Dead by Olga Tokarczuk. And I wanted to read this book because I wanted to read more works in translation, books from around the world. And this book is written by a Polish author. It's set in Poland, and I lived in Warsaw for 1 year and taught English, and I had such a fantastic time there. Warsaw is probably my favourite city. And so, yeah, I wanted to read some Polish fiction. So this book is a literary fiction thriller, and it is about a woman, an older woman who lives in the mountains in southern Poland, and she is very eccentric and funny, and we're seeing the story from her perspective, and she has so many interesting musings on life and what it is to be a person, and I love that kind of thing. And in her mountain community, people are starting to be murdered, and so there's a mystery as to who is murdering these people, what's going on. And I think the highlight of this book for me was the protagonist. She was just so unique, and I loved just living in her world for a bit. And in my preparation for this video, I wanted to choose my favourite quote from each of my top favourite books of the year. And my favourite quote from this book goes like this. The human psyche evolved in order to defend itself against seeing the truth, to prevent us from catching sight of the mechanism. The psyche is our defence system. It makes sure we'll never understand what's going on around us. Its main task is to filter information, even though the capabilities of our brains are enormous, for it would be impossible for us to carry the weight of this knowledge, because every tiny particle of the world is made of suffering. And something that I think about a lot is how humans have an ability to continue through life in spite of all the horror and bad things that occur in life. And this book definitely looks at that subject, but it also is very funny and looks at the absurdism of life as well. Number 9 is The Parable of the Sower, and this is a dystopian book, and I feel that dystopian books are revered more the greater that they predict the future. So something like 1984 I think is revered so highly because it did predict a lot of the things that we're seeing now in the modern day, such as the constant surveillance and the idea of thought crime is kind of present in our modern life. And Parable of the Sower is doing a similar thing where it does kind of predict the future. So the future in the Parable of the Sower is more dire than the one we see currently, but there are fears when reading the book that this future is sort of where we're heading. So in this future, there is not enough real resources to go around, so a lot of people are struggling and living in poverty, and as a consequence there is more crime and bad things that are occurring, and there are these somewhat safe no, it's not really a sanctuary because bad things will happen there, walled communities which are kind of safe but not really, and our protagonist lives in one of these walled communities, but she's very aware of how the outside world is like slowly encroaching onto that community, and are they really safe, you know? And a really interesting about this book is that the main character has this problem where she feels empathy too strongly. Could it be argued to be a problem? I guess it's also a bit of a gift in a way, but like if someone was punched, she would feel that punch. So in the world that she lives in, it is a bit of a problem because there's a lot of violence going on and she feels that violence too intensely, which puts her at risk. But it's also a gift because if everyone in the world was inflicted with this problem, this gift, it would make the world a nicer place. And a great quote from the book is, "The world is full of painful stories. Sometimes it seems as though there aren't any other kind, and yet I found myself thinking how beautiful that glint of water was through the trees." Number 8 is She's Always Hungry by Eliza Clark. She also wrote Boy Parts and Penance, which are 2 great books, and this is her first short story collection, I believe. And this short story collection just made my imagination so happy. There's so many interesting and fun and unusual short stories in here. To give you a flavour of some of the short stories in here, there's a matriarchal society which is like Viking-esque that has really interesting ideas about gender. There is a love story with a twist at the end which felt like it could have been a whole thriller novel. There's also a short story called The King, which is about this alien that lives in a corporate world, our world, and then that world becomes a post-apocalyptic society, and it's about the absurdism of life. And a quote I liked is, "And then I slap myself hard on the head over and over again in the hope that this will fix me and make me normal and knock out all the nasty thoughts from my skull, but it simply makes my head hurt." Okay, number 7 is There Are Rivers in the Sky by Elif Shafak. I made a whole video dedicated to why I loved this book so much. I'll link it down below if you're interested. I love Elif Shafak. Last year I read 10 minutes and 38 seconds in The Strange World and it was on my top 10 of the year. This year I read Island of Missing Trees and There Are Rivers in the Sky. Both are amazing books. What I really love about Elif Shafak is her love of nature. So in Island of Missing Trees there's a real focus on how we should value trees more, and in this book there's a real focus on how we should value water more. So there is a quote that says, "Water remembers, it is humans that forget." And in There Are Rivers in the Sky we follow 3 characters who are from different points of history. We have someone from Victorian England, we have someone from near the river Tigris in the noughties, I believe, or early teens, and then we have someone who lives on a canal boat. What are they called? Canal boats. A barge. And she lives in more modern day London. And each character is loosely connected, but as the story progressed they get more and more connected, and I love a story like that. And I think one of the reasons I love this book so much is I learned so much from the story, and I really enjoy it when a book is entertaining you immensely but it's also informing you because you feel like you're getting smarter. The next book is The Will of the Many by James Islington. I just tried to explain this book and it took me way too long, so I'm just going to try and be a little bit more succinct. So this is a fantasy book inspired by the Roman world. We follow a young adult called Viz, and he is living a kind of a hard life. He used to be a prince named Diego on this island, but his whole family were killed and he had to go into hiding, so he's now called Viz. And in this world we have this thing called the hierarchy, and the hierarchy take the will of people lower down on the hierarchy in order to create magic. And so it really is a metaphor for capitalism in many ways, and Viz doesn't agree with the hierarchy. His island that he lived on before, that he was prince of, didn't agree with the hierarchy, and that's why his family ended up getting killed, because the hierarchy has a lot of power. And Viz is taken under the wing of this man named Old Kiskor, and Old Kiskor wants information on the hierarchy, so he sends Viz to this academy to get some information, like as a spy, and yeah, that's the story. And this book was just so much fun. In the last third of the book I read it so fast because I was just so intrigued about what was going to happen. So much kept happening that I was like, oh my god, what's going on right now, you know, that kind of thing. And yeah, the second book is now out. I'm going to read it soon. The Strength of the Many, I believe it's called. Excited for that. And a quote I really liked is, "You cannot be free if you're afraid to die," which is very true. I'm a bit afraid of death and I need to get over it. Next is Rebecca by Daphne du Maurier. I spoke about this book in a video I made about classics that I read, and I just really enjoyed this book. It did have a lot of the elements that I love in books. I love a gothic story, and so in this book we follow an unnamed protagonist, and she falls in love with this man named Max de Winter. Max de Winter used to be married to a woman named Rebecca. He lives in this wonderful estate named Manderley, and the protagonist goes to live with him in Manderley, and she tries to learn about who Rebecca was, his dead wife, and how she died. And there's also a suspicious a suspicious house maid named Mrs. Danvers who, you know, what's up with her. And it's just a really fun gothic story. It has beautiful writing in it, and it starts with a very famous line, which is, "Last night I dreamt I went to Manderley again." Next is I Who Have Never Known Men. This story was so great because of the different interpretations you could have of what's going on. It really encourages you as the reader to put your thinking cap on and try and figure out the mystery, and I loved that so much. I'm looking for more books that have that sort of thing going on. So in the story we follow a group of women who are in a basement, and there are men patrolling the basement, and that's their life, and they don't really know what they're doing there why they're there, what's going on. And then one day the men disappear, the cage that they're in is open, and they then leave. And what happens next? You should read it. I made a whole video about this book and about my theories on what's going on, but I think really the message of the story is that there are no real answers, which is kind of like life. In life, we don't really know what's going on. We don't really know why we're here. A quote I really liked is, "Perhaps you never have time when you are alone. You only acquire it by watching it go by in others." Okay, now we're on to the top 3. So, my third favourite book of the year is Piranesi by Susanna Clarke. For me, this story is about how the grandeur and mysticism and imagination of the world has sort of lessened through modern life. And I think different readers could have different feelings when reading this book. That is what was coming up for me. So it's about this man named Piranesi who lives in this world on his own, apart from there's one other person called the Other. And in this world there are many halls and vestibules which are ancient, which have ancient architecture. And there is a moment near the beginning where the character finds a crisp packet in this world. And I was like, what is going on? This is so cool, I love it. And it just really inspired me to add a bit more mysticism in my life, to try and romanticize life a bit more. And it's great when a book does that. The quote I liked is, "Birds are not difficult to understand. Their behaviour tells me what they are thinking. Generally, it runs along the lines of, is this food? Is this? What about this? This might be food. I'm also certain that this is. Or occasionally it is raining. I do not like it." And in connection with that quote, I think the book does also encourage you to try and live a bit more simplistically. There's so many things in the modern world that are trying to compete for our attention, and sometimes you should just let them go. I don't think that's the way we're meant to live. I think the way we're meant to live is to sit quietly sometimes. The next book is A Secret History by Donna Tartt. This book is about some awful, pretentious university students who end up murdering their friend, which sounds maybe not that appealing, but what is so appealing about this book for me was the tension within it. It is so readable because at the beginning of the book you discover that a university student named Bunny is murdered by his school friends, and then throughout the first half of the book you're waiting for that murder to occur. So you're wondering why his school friends did this, how did they go from friends to committing this act. And then the second half of the book is about the repercussions of the friends committing this act. And the book has so many interesting things to say about life and what it is to live. It's like the OG dark academia story, and I kind of loved the pretentiousness of it as well, because it's fun sometimes to be a bit pretentious about life. There's also some great word usage in this book. I love expanding my vocabulary, and there are so many great new words that I learned through reading this book, like scruple and perfunctory. And a quote I liked is, "Does such a thing as the fatal flaw, that dark crack running down the middle of life, exist outside literature? I used to think it didn't, now I think it does. And I think mine is this, a morbid longing for the picturesque at all costs." So my favourite book of the year is a fantasy book, and last year my favourite book of the year was Way of Kings by Brandon Sanderson. This year it is Words of Radiance by Brandon Sanderson. So Words of Radiance is book 2 in the Stormlight Archive. I think this is fast becoming my favourite fantasy series of all time. We follow 3 main characters called Kaladin, Shallan and Dalinar, but there's also a vast array of characters in the story as well, and we sometimes see from their perspective. And it's hard to say too much about the book because this is a sequel, but the Stormlight Archive is set in the world of Roshar, and there are these high storms in Roshar occasionally, which are really big storms. You don't really want to be caught out in a high storm, and the high storms carry magic, and this magic is used to generate a lot of things in the world. And a lot of this book is about characters overcoming obstacles, continuing in spite of the odds being against them, and I love that kind of thing. It encourages me to remain hopeful and to keep going against negative things that happen. I love Kaladin, love Shallan, love Dalinar too, but Kaladin and Shallan are my favourite. And if you're looking for an epic fantasy series to get into that is just gonna act as a complete form of escapism, I definitely recommend the Stormlight Archive. Okay, those are my top 10 books of the year. Thank you very much for watching this video. Thank you if you've watched any other of my videos during 2025. I really enjoy making these videos, and I really appreciate everyone that watches them. And I hope to see you in another video soon. Bye bye.